Regret by Claire Davin. It was raining, it was always raining. It started raining that awful day and hadn't stopped since. She was sitting at the kitchen table, like always. A steak knife lay beside an unwashed plate. Nothing better to do but sit and remember. Remember what she was trying to forget. To sit and stare. Stare out. Stare across. Stare down at the grooves in the table. The grooves. The way they twisted and turned when you least expected it. Still staring when she heard the footsteps coming up the drive. She was staring when she heard the knocking at the door. She waited for it to stop. It stopped, but started up again, then stopped again. It was only then she got up. The hall was dark. It used to be filled with light, but not any more. It was so dark she could barely see, but managed to find the handle of the door. She hesitated, not because she was scared, but because she was curious as to who it might be. She listened. No sound from outside. She turned the handle. The door was now open, but she still did not look at the person's face. She looked at the person's dirty boots and very slowly brought her gaze upwards. She took her time, taking in everything about the person. It was something she always did when answering the door. And finally her eyes rested on the face she knew so well. The person stood there staring back, rainwater dripping from him. She would have thought he looked fairly normal if it hadn't been for the hatred in his eyes. Hatred for her. "I need to tell you something, but I have a feeling you already know what it is," he said. She started trembling, tears in her eyes. She knew he had found out what she had done. He pushed past her and walked down the hall into the kitchen. She followed. He turned and looked at her with a fury she had never seen before. She was shaking so violently that she couldn't make out what he was saying. She could only pick out a few words. "How could you? My brother! You always hated him!" But worst of all, the thing that had been racking her with guilt since that awful night. Murder. She tried to tell him to stop, but she could barely get enough air into her lungs, kept shouting and asking to know why she had done it. He stopped. He was out of breath, and she took this moment to tell him what had happened, because he deserved to know. She went back to that horrible night. She and his brother had been arguing, but he got violent and slapped her across the face as she pushed him away. It wasn't a hard push, but it was just enough. He fell backwards, down the stairs, those beautiful stairs she had once loved. She just stood there at the top, frozen as he crashed to the floor. She waited for him to get back up, but he didn't. She ran down and started shaking him, trying to get him to move, but he wouldn't. He couldn't move. She finally realized he was dead. Fall had broken his neck. She was sick. She had killed him. She stopped speaking. She couldn't go on. She sneaked to look at the man. She was surprised to see, not anger as she had expected, but instead no expression at all, just a blank look on his face. He started to advance on her, backing her up against the table, until they were so close that their feet touched. She reached out behind her, groping for something to use in self-defense. Then she found what she was looking for. He raised his hand, but before he had time to strike, she had plunged the knife into his stomach. He fell back, landed on the floor. She stood there watching as he bled to death, knowing this time she had killed someone she really cared about. She sunk to the ground in grief, looking at the man's lifeless face. She couldn't take the agony of it any longer, so she took the knife and turned it in on herself and drove it through her heart.